Before going any further in this channel, I wanted to take time to address a problem I've discovered through my years of engaging in ecumenical discourse, and it's that Roman Catholic apologetics, note I am not saying apologists, although I will be naming names in this video, Roman Catholic apologetics is predatory. That's a very inflammatory thing to say, but I do mean it, and I'm going to list a few things right now that I find to be particularly offensive or duplicitous, and I simply find them to be unnecessary, especially given the fact that I go out of my way to avoid behaving in these manners because I know they're either incredibly offensive, incredibly off-putting, and that's needless. I try not to give offense unless it's necessary to do so. Or they're just flat out fabrications through omission or fabrications through emphasis. Starting with the first one is the come home to Rome language. One of the first books I was ever encouraged to read was Rome Sweet Home. This language, first of all, is confusing because I've had multiple Roman Catholics tell me emphasizing Roman in Roman Catholic is offensive. Now, I still use it because it's precise. You are the Roman Catholic Church. You're not the Church Catholic. That's not how that word is used in antiquity, and it shouldn't be used that way today. But I thought that word was offensive to you guys, being associated with Rome. Regardless, that's a bit of a nitpick. The whole concept of coming home to Rome is extremely illegitimate considering the history of the Roman Catholic Church anathematizing other people. Throughout all of history, the idea that Rome was the unifying force is not historically accurate, and I feel confident saying that because of this right here. Now, I'm not saying this as a way of saying you have to trust me. I don't think you should, but I have my Master's of Divinity. That's proof that I've had to study these things. I've had to study the ancient languages, I've had to study the history, and I've had to study my own history in the Reformed context, although I myself am a Lutheran. So this is not coming from nowhere. The idea that Rome is home is laughable. It's laughable to the Orthodox, it's laughable to Protestants, it's laughable to most evangelicals as well. This is needlessly offensive, and frankly, the constant refrain of come home to Rome feels a bit cringe-inducing over time. It also relies on a characterization of the consistency of the papacy that is not historically reliable. See Dr. Jerry Walls for this. He has a great paper on this. Look up If Christ Be Not Raised, If Peter Be Not the First Pope. Very good article, kind of goes over the historical data for a papacy in the first century. Spoiler, it's non-existent. Now, I'm not saying that this is a refutation of Roman Catholicism. What I am saying is it may be shocking to some converts to learn that their history was not told to them very straight. This idea that, oh, well, there's this unbroken chain of succession. There's this monarchical bishop in Rome that's obviously there historical, when that's far from obvious in the historical record. This comes across as duplicitous and seems predatory against those who have not studied these things. This goes into something, Jerry Walls brings this up, and I've frequently heard this myself, that, oh, well, these doctrines take time to develop. This is another issue that's rather predatory. These doctrines develop when I read councils down through the ages, specifically when it comes to the point where the Roman Catholic Church is kind of easily identifiable in the mid to late medieval period, and beyond that, the language that's used even at the Council of Trent in many canons is that of the entire church throughout all of history believed these things, when that is provably false. That is something that is provably false. The entire church did not believe these things. Specifically in regards to Marian dogmas. That's a big one. Specifically, the Assumption of Mary. Dr. Gavin Ortland has some great work on this if you want to go look at that as well. But these are areas where the church has not believed these things forever. And again, to Jerry Wall's point on the papacy, history is not on your side with these things. So the concept of using the doctrine of development, a doctrine that was created by a Protestant convert, by Cardinal Newman, which I'll probably make a video on Cardinal Newman as well. There seems to be historical data showing that he was only elevated to the role of cardinal so that he could kind of have a better mystique about him as a Protestant convert. It's far from obvious that he was received well, especially in his own time. The Ultramontanists did not like him, it appears to be. But Cardinal Newman creates this development doctrine. Why was this accepted? It doesn't seem at all in the historical record that many of these doctrines were even remotely historical, like papal primacy. You can say it develops over time, and that's fine. I'm not saying this is a comprehensive refutation of Roman Catholicism. I am saying this is more difficult to wrap your head around. If you read the development thesis, it's a deep read. It takes time to get through. Why is this conveyed to be like, well, this is just easy. The church has always believed these things. If that were true, why do you need the development hypothesis? You see, there's these two things where if the doctrinal development hypothesis is completely legitimate, then I would expect there to be even weaker evidence on your side going back to the ancient church. You can't have this both ways. You can't say, well, this is the faith of the ancients, and you have doctrinal development. You make your system unfalsifiable at that point, which again becomes predatory. If there is evidence in the ancient church, well, then it's the church of the ancients. If there's no evidence, you say it developed out of nowhere. This is a double standard, and again, it's predatory. When you have an answer for everything and you don't admit to some difficulties, that's a major problem. The biggest one, and this is the final one, this is the one that's really kind of irked me lately, and it's showed up on my Instagram page as well multiple times. There's actual misinformation or duplicitous writing. And to give a concrete example of this, I'm going to give you one right now. And it is Jimmy Akin's article on Catholic Answers about whether or not Jerome affirmed the Deuterocanon. You can read this article. I'll try and link it in the comments. YouTube is being weird about me putting links in the drop-down section. So I'll have to put this in the comments. But read this article, okay? To his credit, the citation that he uses of Jerome talking about the apocryphal elements of Daniel, he does characterize that part correctly, that Jerome is only talking about the section of Daniel, and he's only talking about non-Christian Jews' understanding of that, one which he may or may not share. But just to read this for a second or two, and then tell me that he's not trying to make it sound like Jerome definitively changed his mind and decided to respect the church's opinion on the Deuterocanon. You can be honest about the data here and say, well, Jerome does not affirm the Deuterocanon, and he also never states he changed his mind. You can say it's open-ended, but the way this is written is duplicitous, and here is how we know. Jerome's mind didn't change because at the time of Martin Luther, one of Luther's biggest critics who he interacted with was Cardinal Cajetan. And we have Cardinal Cajetan's copies of his commentaries of the Bible, in which Cardinal Cajetan says that even councils have to be reduced to the correction of Jerome. One of Luther's biggest critics understood that Jerome didn't affirm the Deuterocanon. Now, I've looked on Catholic Answers, and I have found nothing about Cardinal Cajetan, specifically in regards to this issue with Jerome. The reason this matters, and this is a big deal, okay? At the end of Akin's article, he says, well, no one church father gets to settle the canon. Agreed. That's not why we bring it up. We bring it up to highlight this was a live topic that even Roman Catholics at the time of the Reformation were allowed to disagree on. If you don't believe me, you can look up Cardinal Cajetan's talking about this. It's very easy to find, and it's not like I'm quote mining. Cardinal Cajetan did not view the Deuterocanon as actual scripture. They could be read and they were useful, which is something Luther agreed with as well. I could flip to you in this Lutheran Prayer Companion book a prayer of Luther where he cites data from an apocryphal source. That's fine. They're not inspired scripture. This is a big deal because if you can establish that this was allowed at one point, but then the Catholic Church, in response to Luther, collapsed this very live disagreement, this is an unnecessary binding of conscience. And that is the entire point of Protestantism. Your authority is illegitimate because you bind things that ought not be bound. There should have been freedom with this. If Jerome left the question open, if Cajetan left the question open, you can add to that Desiderius Erasmus, who is also a contemporary of Luther, as well as Cardinal Jimenez, who was, I believe, a bit later than Luther. Okay? This was an acceptable opinion to have before the Council of Trent collapsed the distinction. That is illegitimate. Okay? And the fact that you have a Roman Catholic apologist not telling the whole truth of Jerome and saying, well, Jerome respected the church's position. Just because he agreed to translate the books does not mean in any capacity that it changed his mind. That is selective emphasis that amounts to lying. And I'm dead serious about that point. This is emblematic of many ways that Roman Catholicism interacts with history. They will selectively emphasize, but they also won't tell you the whole truth. If they can find it in church history, well, this is just the church of all history. If it's not there, oh, well, development. And they make the system unfalsifiable. This is predatory. On top of the fact that Roman Catholics frequently go after poorly catechized evangelicals. I cannot tell you how many times I have known someone who did not care for church history, only took in popularizers, listened to very, very lowbrow, unrefined preachers, and they fall victim to Roman Catholicism. And then, what do you know? All of a sudden, they're all about reading scholarly sources on Roman Catholicism. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, okay? If I was talking to a Roman Catholic that was like, I'm really looking into Protestantism, I'd go, I want you to actually look into the Roman Catholic response to our scholarship. I would like you to look up refutations. I'd also like to make sure that you have a solid grasp on what Roman Catholicism teaches. Why? Why would I do that? If I truly believe that Protestantism, Lutheranism is the case, is the truth, why would I not want someone to join? Why would I want them to look at refutations? Because I want them to join because they're convinced it's true, not because they're convinced based on popular talking points. Okay? I don't want someone to convert and then find out that they'd have been the victim of selective emphasis or deception. That doesn't sit right with me, okay? And there's a lot of evangelicals who have very bad understandings of Roman Catholicism. There's a lot of Protestant apologists who have poor understandings of Roman Catholicism. I don't like them either, and it's part of the reason why I wanted to start this channel, to have solid interaction with these points. But when you have Catholic Answers, the name, Catholic Answers, you have a Catholic Answers apologist doing selective emphasis that effectively amounts to lying. I have a problem with that.